One of the issues that's coming up already in the news, and you're going to read a lot about it, is the repeal or reform of the Affordable Care Act, usually known as Obamacare. One of the signature achievements of the Obama presidency was to get a bill through that had originally two intentions. One, to cover more of the people that are uninsured medically in this country. We are the only advanced industrial country with the tens of millions of people that have no medical insurance. We are completely in the forefront in that regard. And this was a bill that passed and reduced that. Didn't eliminate it, but it reduced it. And the other thing it was supposed to do was to reduce the costs of our medical care. There would have to be called an utter and complete failure. It did increase the number of people that were insured, and that's certainly a valid and good thing that it did. It did not reduce the cost because it didn't go after the problem of cost in the medical care. And again, just to remind you all, we have, we have hospitals, doctors, insurance companies, and the drug and medical device producers. Those are the four industries. Together they comprise something we should be calling the medical industrial complex, right? The way we, with Eisenhower, learned about the military industrial complex. Well, we have a medical industrial complex. They work together, and together they make sure that the insurance covers the high prices of the drugs, and the high prices of the drugs make them look away from the problem of the high price of the hospital and the high price of the doctor and all the rest of it. And so they work together. They have their tensions among them, they do, but they also work together, which makes the United States also a pioneer. We spend roughly 18% of the total GDP in this country, the total output of goods and services, we spend on medical care. No other country on earth comes close to that. The cost of medical care in many other countries is half or less than that. Places, remote places like France or England or Germany, Italy, those kinds of places that are clearly way behind us, where people are dying on the streets every day and only get to be 30, 40 years of age before they keel over, all of that. So we are a society that overpays, and that bill didn't solve the problem. So now we see that the president wants it to be undone, and the Republican majority in the two houses want it to be undone. So my guess is it will be undone. And so the question really is, why? Must have been wondering to you, is it that there's a principle that we shouldn't insure people? That it is somehow better to have millions of people with no medical insurance? Is this an ideological commitment? Is this a principle of some sort? There are some people who talk like that, but not many, not many. And so I don't think we have to go there in some obvious way to look for the answer. Well, is it then perhaps something else? Could it be that perhaps the big industrial combines, the medical industrial complex, got together and wants to undo this bill? And the answer is no, because they basically got the bill they like. With more people insured, that's more business for them, paid business. They weren't required to lower their costs, none of it. So there would be no reason for them to go on the warpath to undo this. They got pretty much what they wanted, which is no government restriction on how much they can charge us for medical care, medical insurance. Well, then what is the reason? The reason is simple. How was the extension of medical insurance in the United States, how was it paid for, especially the government's role in the exchanges, in subsidizing poor people and all of it? How was it paid for those of you who don't know? It was paid for by two taxes. A 0.9% Medicare tax on earned income over $200,000 per individual or $250,000 per couple. And on top of that, a 3.8% net investment income tax on income from wealth. That is, money you get not from a wage or a salary where you're paid for your work, but rather income from wealth if you own stocks and bonds. You with me then? The cost of Medicare extension, of the Obamacare, was a tax on rich individuals, 0.9%, people who earn over $250,000 a year as a couple or $200,000 as an individual, and 3.8% on people who get income from wealth. And by the way, not all people, but only people who, again, have $250,000 or more. If you earn $100,000 and you have some stocks, you're not covered under this tax. You don't have to pay. In other words, folks, Obamacare was paid for by a tax on the rich, and that's why it has to go. You understand? The Republicans and Mr. Trump want to give to the rich the tax cut. He couldn't admittedly say, one of my first acts is to give rich people a tax cut. This doesn't sound good. So instead, he's getting rid of the medical thing that imposes on us the blah, 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 blah. But the issue is that Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, one of the most important government in Washington think tanks that produces really good stuff, which I use all the time, as many other economists do. They calculated millionaires will get 80% of the tax reduction that comes from not having Obamacare. Bingo. And if you want, you can see this at the end. You can just go to cbpp.org. cbpp.org. You get this document, and it has a wonderful set of charts showing that the people who will enjoy tax savings are the richest people in the United States. The top 1/10% with incomes above 3.8 million would receive tax cuts, if this repeal goes through, of $195,000 each. Are you ready? Because most Americans can't stand these numbers. And it's not because you don't get the numbers. It's because you don't want to see this. Because this is like a slap in your face while the person slapping you is giggling. Wealthy people in America are going to enjoy a $195,000 reduction in their taxes because there won't be Obamacare anymore. Meanwhile, the press will be telling you all about this or that detail of medical service that isn't good in this thing and that we can do better. Yeah, maybe, but that's got nothing to do with anything. Okay, let me turn then to the major issues for discussion today. And these have to do with, a lot have to do with Trump and what Trump is doing. But what choice do I have? It's what's in the newspaper every day. It's what is worrying many of you, as it should. And there's a lot going on, much that we don't know, very hard to figure out how much is babble and tweets and so forth and how much is real. But some of the things we can talk about. So let's begin with this business of blocking the movement of jobs to Mexico. He's made as much of that as almost anything else he has talked about, particularly with automobile companies, but not only with them. He is going to stop companies from moving jobs to Mexico. Now, the purpose of this is obvious. He wants to appeal, as he did during his campaign, to workers who are bitter about having no job or having a job that's very poor. They would like to go back to the jobs they once had in things like automobile factories, where there was a strong union, the UAW, and where they got good pay and good benefits and all the rest. And this notion that we're not going to let them go to Mexico is a way of saying we're going to bring this back to you. You're going to have a chance for a decent job, decent benefits, and so on. How is he going to market this to the companies in question? He will make, out of all the automobile companies and all of the others, he will make out of them enemies that will look like what's being done to him by the intelligence community, look like nothing in comparison. They will go after him in ways I won't even speculate. Why? Because they have invested tens of billions of dollars in these factories premised on the notion that they could produce these things there and ship them into the United States. What are they going to do? How are they going to recoup all of the money they have invested? Why would they let this president wreck their financial situations by actually doing this? And remind you, I don't know whether he's actually going to do it. It's a little bit too early to tell. But he's acting like he's going to. So let's pursue for a minute. Let's suppose he does. How can he avoid making these companies his sworn enemies? And by sworn enemies, I mean that these companies will shift all of their money to whoever runs against him in the next election, who will shift all their money to stymie his ability to get it through Congress by already acting in the midterm elections that are coming up, etc., etc. How's he going to do that? He's announced it already. He's going to lower the corporate income tax. Mr. Trump wants to lower it to 15%. By the way, the legal corporate income tax today is 35%. 35% of the profits that a company gets, revenue minus costs, they have to pay a 35% unless they have deduction, which they usually do, but at least legally 35%. They want to reduce that, Trump to 15%, the Republican majority in the House and Senate to 20%. So given that they have the majority of votes, we're going to get a reduction from 35 to either 20 or 15 or some number between them, most likely. That's Mr. Trump's offer to them. You can't produce in Mexico, but don't worry, I'll take care of you by lowering the tax on you. Okay, you all with that? That's how he hopes to get that part done. So now let's follow it out. What happens if you don't tax business at 35%, but you drop it to 15 or 20? A vast amount of money that used to come into Washington from these companies won't be coming in. Okay, now you have to follow the bouncing ball. What's going to happen? There's only two options for the government, really. Either they make up on the taxes no longer paid by companies, because they reduce it, by taxing, ready, you. Raising your taxes to make up for the money that the corporations aren't spending. That would be one thing to do. But the problem with that is if you're all taxed more, you have less money to spend. And if you have less money to spend, you'll buy less stuff. And if you buy less stuff, people will lose their jobs because there's no point in having them hired to produce the stuff you can't buy because you're paying higher taxes. Hello? Might you lose more jobs that way than you gain from the shift from Mexico to... Yep. But of course the government may not do that, may not tax you all. Politician doesn't want to do that. So there's an alternative. If you don't get the money from the corporations and you're not going to make the rest of us pay, you can just do less with the government. You know, we don't have the money. So, for example, you know, screw the students. Who needs to give them money? They should be doing it on their own. Private self-reliance should be cultivated in them. And who needs welfare? And who needs food stamps? And who needs all this stuff? But of course, if the government is not going to spend the money, since the companies aren't going to have to give it in the way they used to, and they're not going to tax the mass of people, well then some of the things they won't have the money for is, public employees who will lose their jobs. You understand this business about we're not going to let them go to Mexico and we're going to give them a lower tax? That's a job-killing program. And the big question is, will it kill as many or more jobs than we save from not letting them go to Mexico? Nobody knows. We'll have to see. But the notion that this is a simple idea of getting jobs, that is nonsense. It's really important that you understand that. Okay. What else, however, is Mr. Trump being asked by the car companies to do? Because they see here an opportunity. Big business in America long ago learned an important lesson from Mao in China. When confronted with a bad thing, figure out how to turn it into a good thing. See, a bad thing is the president-elect Trump is making it hard for them to move production to the low wages of Mexican workers. He's making it hard for them. How do we turn this into something good? I got it. Not only should the president cut the income tax on us, but there's something else he can do. And then we'll be more willing to go along with him in this Mexico game. They've already announced it, if you pay attention. They want the miles per gallon rule to be relaxed. See, under Obama, they were supposed to get to a minimum of 50 miles a gallon as the basic efficiency of production by the year 2022. They want that relaxed. They don't want it that high. They don't want it that soon. So one of the things Mr. Trump will be pressured to give them in exchange for the Mexico business is a relaxation. And that means all of you have a better chance of getting emphysema than you had before. That's your part of the Mexican hustle that's being perpetrated on you here. We're still not done. There's another thing the car companies have proposed to Mr. Trump as a quid pro quo to get the movement to Mexico to stop. It turns out that the car and truck companies, they're the same companies, see that their future is in the self-driving vehicle, the self-driving truck and the self-driving car. You've all heard about that, I assume. It turns out that in order for that to work, it's very expensive to build, because you have to, on every road where this is going to happen, all kinds of electronic gear to enable the car's mechanism for self-driving to work. The companies see enormous profits in making self-driving cars if, and only if, they don't have to pay for the devices that are built into the highway. You do all understand, I hope, the economics of automobiles. The automobile was never an efficient mechanism of travel. That's because the only way to make an automobile functional in the United States was to build a highway on which the automobile runs. If the car companies that sell you the car had to build a highway, the cost of the highway would have undone the profits of the car, and we'd all be riding horses. So the way the car companies worked it is, ready? You pay for the road. They make the money off the car. And on behalf of the car companies, thank you. Thank you very much. They're terribly kind of you. You're going to get this hustle again now. You're going to hear about not letting them go to Mexico. Meanwhile, you are going to pick up the bill for equipping the roads to make it possible to fire 2.5 million truck drivers who earn their living in this country that way, who aren't going to have any job anymore. And we will all read in the newspaper 6 years from now how the job losses among truck drivers far outweigh the job saved by not letting them go to Mexico. You get it? Get it now, just for me. So you don't have to wait 3 years to figure it out. That'll be how long it takes the New York Times. Okay, so much for the reality of this hustle of not letting them go to Mexico. It is a hustle, and you have to understand it because we're talking about profit-driven corporations. If you close down the way for them to make more profits in one way, they have 6 others. They have, it's like that little story about the leak in the dikes in Holland, and the water comes through, and the young man puts his finger in the hole, and then like in the cartoon, another hole happens over here, and then he runs out of fingers, and it's over. All that's happening is Mr. Trump, to great fanfare, is closing one avenue, maybe, but all the others are open. And they are going after all of them with the hope that they may do so well on the others that they'll come out ahead even if they can't go to Mexico. Meanwhile, the people who follow this will think they have a champion in Mr. Trump. No, you have a hustler. And he's not that way different from other presidents. This is a hustle to give him a certain patina, a certain image. But the realities are we're stuck in an economic system that always does this to us. And I haven't even given you the biggest one. If the automobile companies really cannot go to Mexico, if that really happens, not only will they do all these other things, make Trump give them all of this other stuff that I've already laid out for you, but the companies will have their own mechanism of coping. If they can't get cheap labor in Mexico, they will do one of two things. Bring the Mexicans here to work in those car factories. And if Mr. Trump closes that off as part of the closing off of migration, then they will be left with the third option, which is called automation. Cars are made by robots already. Cars will be made by more and more robots because the incentive is there. You're not going to pay Americans American wages. That's why you went to Mexico. And the way to save on wages, if you can't go to Mexico, is to require fewer workers at the higher prices and to replace them with machines. And Mr. Trump has said absolutely nothing to indicate he would stop or slow that process. The problem is capitalism. The problem is a profit-driven system that puts employers in a position to forever be sticking it to the working class one way or another. And to get very excited about you're going to stop it over here is kind of silly because that just means they're going to go over there. They know how to do this. They've been doing this for a long time. It's time for us to catch up and realize we've been had it done to us. Don't make another effort to stop this without understanding what you're up against. It's the system that's the problem, not this or that detail. Okay, next. Mr. Trump is talking a great deal about an investment in infrastructure. So let's be real clear what that is. Infrastructure is roads, highways, harbors, all of the stuff that makes the rest of the economy work. You need the roads, you need the harbors, you need all of that. Okay? And we've neglected that in the United States. Why? First, and very important to understand, it's back to the political system we have, the dysfunctional, disorganized political system. Here's how it works. We have working class people, the mass of people over here, and we have rich people and business over here. And they both look to the government for all kinds of services. The rich people want fancy schools, and they want lovely neighborhoods, and they want all of this stuff. The businesses want you to build the road over here and the railroad over there and all the rest, and spend time convincing other countries to buy our stuff and all the rest. And the mass of people, they want stuff too. They want schools and health care and public parks they can have picnics in and all the rest. So you have the mass of people who want stuff from the government, and corporations and the rich who want some other things from the government. Meanwhile, the government, in order to provide these things, has to raise taxes. Where else is it going to get the money to do it? So it taxes corporations and the rich, and it taxes the mass of people. But this is now a setup, because of course, in this arrangement, corporations and business would like it if the taxes they had to pay were reduced, while the services they got from the government were enhanced. And the mass of people want the reverse. This puts the politician in an impossible situation. The politician cannot what? He can't satisfy both. He either has to say to one of them, you got to pay more, or I'm going to give you less. And he doesn't want to do that with either one. With the corporations and the rich, they're the ones who fund his campaign. With the mass of people, they're the ones who vote. He's stuck. So what does he do in that situation? Two things, basically, in our society. Both of them nuts. Nuts. But you know, it's hard to explain nuts if you're inside the asylum. So I'm working against the grain here. Here's nuts, number one. One thing you can do is provide all the services to the rich and the corporations and to the mass of people and not tax them. How do you do that? You borrow the money. It's magic. Hello, I'm Governor Krispy Kreme. I'm going to give you everything you want and you don't have to pay any taxes. There's just a bond issue here, see? I have to borrow the money. So he does, knowing that he'll go on to higher office, or in his case, on to, who knows? Lower office is what seems to be in his future, okay? He had his shot at higher office and didn't work out. So Mr. Krispy Kreme took, typical politician, borrow the money, knowing that you're going to go on to another job by the time the payback has to happen. That'll be the problem of your successor. Screw him or her. That's one option. Here's a second option. Don't maintain the infrastructure. Save money. Don't fix the bridge. Don't fix the road. Don't fix anything. Use the money, instead of maintaining the infrastructure, use it to give the corporations what they want without taxing them, and to give the masses of people enough to keep them quiet without raising their taxes too much. The problem of both of these hustles is they don't last forever. Over time, the debts go so high that now the government has to raise money not to do anything, but just to pay back the stupid debt. And that's hard to explain to people. I have to raise your taxes, and as a result of my raising your taxes, I'm going to give you exactly nothing. Why? Because I need that money that I'm raising from you to pay off the debts. Oh, really? Who are the people that you're paying off? Well, who buys state debt in this country? Corporations and rich people. If you're not a corporation and a rich person, ask yourself, how many state bonds do you own? Every one of you in the room. Yeah, you understand, don't you? You're not a major owner of New Jersey bonds, are you? No. That's a rich people's game. So eventually they'll have to raise the taxes, which is already the case. Raise the taxes to get the money to pay off the rich people from whom they borrowed so they didn't have to tax them in the first place. You live in this. Laugh to keep from crying because that's the alternative. So now they come, Mr. Trump, saying he's had it on good authority that the infrastructure of the United States is a disaster, which it is. Our bridges are falling down, our roads are falling apart, everything is a disaster. And so Mr. Trump has come up with a solution. It's called a public-private partnership. Doesn't that sound good? It's like something the Boy Scouts would come up with. What does that mean? Private people, businesses, are going to be asked to invest in the rebuilding of our infrastructure. And the government is going to shovel money in there. But there's a difference between the private money invested and the government. The government uses your and my taxes to help part of the cost of infrastructure. But the other part is private money, and private money wants to be paid back with interest. Well, how are you going to rebuild infrastructure if you have to make money off of it? Well, you're going to have to charge people for the use of the infrastructure to pay off the private. And why do you need the private? Because you neglected it. And why did you neglect it? Because you never taxed the corporations and the rich, which if you had done it at the beginning, none of this would be necessary. Do you understand? You are now being asked to support a solution to a problem we didn't need to have, and we only have because the government cannot tax corporations and the rich, even though they have it because of the political problem, and they can't tax the mass of people because literally they are at the edge already and will make real trouble. So this dysfunctional system is about to become more dysfunctional because it can't let the infrastructure go much further. It's hampering the productivity of the United States in competition with other countries. They dare not raise the money publicly to solve the problem for the same reason they didn't maintain the infrastructure. So we're left with a public-private partnership. We're going to get ripped off again. Finally, the tax cuts, because they are job creators. Now, this is so crazy. This is so stunningly non sequitur, illogic, that it kind of takes my breath away. So bear with me. let's make sure we understand a tax cut on business. What does a tax cut on business do? Let's be real clear, because it's not difficult. It lowers the tax on the business. That's what a business tax does. That's all it does. So instead of paying $6 million as Company A to the government, you're only going to pay $4. That's a tax cut. That's $2 million that you used to have to pay in taxes that you don't have to pay anymore. That's all that is. Now the question arises, what is the corporation that gets such a tax cut? And remember, Mr. Trump is about to give him a big one. What is that company going to do with the money it doesn't have to pay in taxes anymore? And the answer is, whatever they feel like. They are not in any way required to use it to hire anybody. Free enterprise means they are free to use the money they don't pay in taxes any way they like. For example, they could raise the salaries of their top executives. Is that legal? Absolutely. Are they free to do that? Absolutely. Is there a limit on their doing that? No. No legal limit. They're free. Here's another thing they could do. They could buy more expensive shrubbery to put around the offices where the executives exist. They could use the money for shrubbery. And that would make more jobs for shrubberers. But probably not too many. Could they take the money and lend it to a foreign government for buying the bonds of a... Of course they could. Do they? Yes. Lots of them do that. How many jobs in the United States does that create? Roughly none. You ready? Now, here comes the best one. Could they take the money that the government no longer takes from them in taxes? That $2 million I told you about? Government drops the taxes, so instead of paying $6, they only pay $4. Now they have the extra $2 million that they don't have to pay in taxes. You know what they can do? They can lend it, ready, to the United States government. What? Yes. And the United States government will be grateful. It will use that money for the infrastructure. And here's the deal for these rich people. Before, they had to pay those $2 million in taxes to the government. End of story. They lose, the government gets, and the government spends. But by giving them a tax cut, which they then lend to the government, these people use the money they used to have to pay as a tax. Now they lend it to the government, which is obliged to pay them back. And during the 2 or 4 or 6 years while they're waiting to have it paid back, they get interest on this. You with me here? If you ask your average rich person, which would you prefer? Would you like to be taxed $2 million? End of story. Or would you like us to not tax you and instead you lend it to us, we'll pay you back and interest while you wait? That takes maybe 2-3 seconds for the average rich person, slow that they often are, to figure out, I think I like this loan arrangement. I like the government to have deficits. I'll give a speech on the 4th of July about deficits have been inappropriate, but I love them. I own them. I make money off of them. That's how this works. You cut taxes for corporations, they can lend it to the government in a way that hurts all the rest of us because we have to pay that interest sooner or later. Or they can take it and lend it to another government, or they can invest it in jobs, okay, but jobs in China or India or Brazil. There's absolutely nothing that requires or mandates or guarantees that a tax cut to business stimulates jobs, creates jobs. It's just, I'm going to use a technical term, the claim that a tax cut is a job creator is, to use Adam Smith's words, bullshit. Okay? That's what that is. You probably didn't know that Adam Smith had that in him. He was a professor of religion, he really was, in Glasgow University in Scotland. But when he was confronted with things like this, he sank to a moral low and used terms like that. It's an amazing thing that in our culture you can parlay what corporations want, which is a tax cut, for all the obvious reasons. I just went through some of the things they can do with that money that they don't want to pay in taxes. But to convert that into, we are job creators, that's stunning. That's stunning. That's like going up to a person, punching them right in the nose, and explaining how that's a very important way to avoid diabetes later in life. What? But since diabetes is something we all don't want, maybe, who knows? Keeps the jobs from going to Mexico. Let's suppose he puts the tax on the Chinese goods coming into the United States. When I say Chinese goods, again, please remember, half, roughly, of the goods that come to the United States from China are produced by subsidiaries of American corporations. Calling them Chinese is accurate as to where they were produced and as to the nationality of the workers who made them. But the corporation that brings them here, that's an American, half of it is an American corporation. So both the Chinese corporations and the American, if they have to pay taxes of the sort that are being described or tariffs, they are going to lose their market here. And that's Mr. Trump's idea, because if we can't afford to bring in the Chinese shirts and pants and socks we're all wearing, then, and iPhones that we are carrying, then we're going to have them, the ideas, produced here, because we want them, but we won't pay the price to bring them in, so we'll have American production. Well, let's follow it out. Number one, if they're produced in the United States, then they're going to have to pay American wages. The reason they went to China was to pay no wages, or excuse me, Chinese wages, which are very low. Well, if they have to pay American wages, because they're produced here, they're going to raise the price of these underpants you're wearing to the point where, I mean, you won't change them but once every month. So they last longer, and people will stay far away from you because of it. You're going to have to, your cost of living, it's going to go nuts. And what are you all going to do? You're all going to struggle, that's what people do, to raise your wages and salaries so that you can afford what it now will cost you to get a toaster, or to replace the carburetor in your car, or to buy the suit you're wearing. And yet, in the private sector, less than 7% of Americans have a union. You're not going to get rising wages that are adequate. The price is going to go up, but your income isn't. This is an assault on you. And poor Mr. Trump will be successful, perhaps, in giving more Americans jobs, even as the standard of living of all Americans goes down. And then Mr. Trump will have to worry, which way is that going to work? Will people appreciate that they have more jobs, or be enraged that the American dream is slipping even further away from any achievement at all? That is, you don't even see it discussed in the newspapers, but you ought to, because it's right there in the logic of this situation. No escape. No escape. But we're not done. Let's suppose it happens. Jobs are created in America. Chinese goods are frozen out. I believe I said this to you last month, and if not, let me say it to you again. To do such a thing is a direct assault against the People's Republic of China. And if you think the last few weeks of the sudden discussion with Taiwan and all the hoopla around the phone call with the new leader in Taiwan, that is nothing compared to what you're going to see. The Chinese economic miracle is 25 years of building up an industry in China, creating massive new industrial capability, creating I don't know how many cities, brand new Chinese cities that are spectacular to see, and a rapid transportation. I mean, China is the new emerging world economy, no question about it. But it is an entire economic miracle built on exports. China made this strategic decision, very smart, back in the 1980s and 90s, that the only way to grow quickly, to industrialize, to become a power in the world, instead of the plaything of Western colonialism, which China had so long been, was to become the producer for everything in the capitalist world. That's why we're all wearing and etc. Chinese everything. They did it. They produced the quality at the price nobody could compete with. You close that off, what are the 400 million people that over the last 20 years left the countryside in China and moved to the coastal areas where most of their industry is located? What are you going to do with these people? You send them back into the countryside? There's nothing for them there. Leave them unemployed in the big cities? You will have a revolution in China. And no one knows that better than the leadership of the People's Republic of China. You are leaving them no option. They might try, and now you get the notion of economics, they might try to solve the problem of the United States closing itself off by dumping all the stuff they can no longer sell here in Latin America, Asia, Africa, Europe. The European economies are in such trouble, they can't handle this. What are they going to do? Close themselves off? They can't do that the way we do because they're not organized and unified enough yet. And the irony is, if Americans try to export and compete with the Chinese in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, they will beat us. Because they pay those wages and we pay the ones here. We can't win that way. So that'll undercut the... you get a sense of it all being blocked? Good. Too much is going on here. It can't... I mean, the odds that this is all going to work out, you got to believe Adam Smith and God's direct intervention. I don't mean to be disrespectful for those of you who think that's going on, but you'd have to rely on that. And that's an iffy proposition. You can't do that. You are declaring war on a world economy because the United States, and here I'm going to quote Mr. Bannon. You all know he's the guru behind all of this. Mr. Bannon was defending himself right after the election from the charge that he's a white supremacist, alt-right national, and all of that. He said, no, I'm not any of those things. I'm just I'm an economic nationalist. That's what his self-definition. But in a sense, I hope I've given you enough to understand that's it. That's what this is. It's a kind of economic nationalism. But it relies on the mass of the working class not understanding that if they get the jobs, they're going to get the whacking of their standard of living they've never seen before. And it also means you're not facing the risk that the trade wars that are coming, if the United States does this, have a nasty habit in human history of becoming military wars a few years later. And then we will pay in blood for this extraordinary shifting that Mr. Trump's election has begun. So those of you that are scared, well, that's exactly what you should be. People who aren't scared are not paying attention. That's okay. A lot of human beings handle scary things by not paying attention. But the risks here... There's always somebody who laughs at it's like that Charles Addams cartoons, you remember, he always had that. There are very profound dangers in what he's doing. And the dangers are there if he's stumped and blocked by Republicans and Democrats, because at that point, how does he survive? And how does a man like that function if his survival is being threatened.
Anger.
Anger, lashing out, having now surrounded himself with people who, Lord knows what they are capable of doing in the way of slowing him down or not. So if he can't get it done, there's one kind of danger. And if he does get it done, there's a whole other set of dangers. And as some of you said before, you're right. This is a sign of a system whose decline is running out of options. In mathematics, there's a theorem about degrees of freedom, how you can solve a dilemma. How many degrees of freedom have you got to work out of it? The degrees of freedom, like a trap, are shrinking for the United States. That's why we have this crazy election. That's why we have these options facing us. That's why I have the job of making you aware of what you're getting or what we are being drawn into.